Okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm New York State Attorney General Schneiderman. I thank you for joining us here today for an important announcement about a recently uncovered threat to our democratic process and our regulatory system. I'm proud to be here today with one of the nation's leaders in this fight, FCC Commissioner Jessica Rosenworcel, who's been one of the strongest voices for internet freedom and the integrity of our administrative process in the nation. Ladies and gentlemen, the internet is the public square of the 21st century. Unfortunately, the internet is also the crime scene of the 21st century. The rules surrounding how the internet is regulated or not regulated are enormously important for our families, our businesses, and to the proper functioning of our government agencies. The current debate in Washington over net neutrality is a vital one for the future of a free, fair, and open internet. And our laws give New Yorkers and all Americans the right to make their voices heard in that process. Federal regulatory proceedings can sound abstract and complex, but this is how rules that affect virtually every aspect of business and commerce, as well as the rights and obligations of all Americans, are determined. And the public's right to notice and the opportunity to be heard in the rulemaking process is a critical aspect of our democracy, addressed often by the United States Supreme Court. Unfortunately, as I made clear in an open letter to the Federal Communications Commission on November 21st, I have serious concerns about the integrity of the FCC's rulemaking process now underway in Washington. Federal law guarantees every American a voice in this process. But, ladies and gentlemen, an investigation by my office has revealed that this process has been deeply corrupted. For 6 months now, attorneys in my office have been reviewing millions of public comments submitted to the FCC's website about net neutrality. What we have found so far is extremely disturbing. According to a study paid for by Broadband for America, which actually represents internet service providers, it's an industry organization, they even acknowledge that as many as 8 million fake comments may have been submitted to the FCC. These comments, like those submitted by Homer Simpson and computer-generated fake identities, are clearly false. We've also discovered that in addition to making up names, at least an additional 1 million comments indicate that they were submitted using real people's stolen identities. That includes as many as 50,000 people here in New York, real New Yorkers whose names and real addresses have been unwittingly used to submit phony comments. And we do think that if we could get the records from the FCC, these numbers probably are going to go up significantly. For months, to that end, we've been pleading with the FCC to help us with our investigation so that we can get to the bottom of what happened and determine who is responsible. The FCC chairman and his staff have responded by stonewalling. So last week, we decided to expand our investigation without the FCC's cooperation. We put out a call for people to check to see if their names were used to submit false comments. We launched a web page that allows anyone who thinks their identity may have been stolen to check the complete file of FCC comments and see if a fake submission was made in their name. In less than a week, we've received more than 3,000 responses from across the country, and they continue to come in. Like the comment submitted under the name and address of someone we'll call Jill in Rochester, New York. Well, Jill's father wasn't very happy about that submission because when he checked online, he reported that the real Jill is only 13 years old and never submitted a comment. Or the woman in Albany who supposedly submitted a comment in July of 2017. Sadly, her son reached out to us to say that it was impossible because she had died in June. Even right here in my office, my assistant press secretary, Rachel, had a phony comment submitted under her name using the address of her childhood home. This was submitted in the name of someone who works in my office. It's a fake comment with a stolen identity. Impersonation, forgery, other misuses of a person's identity are violation of New York law. This is akin to identity theft on a massive scale. When we saw this troubling pattern back in June, we reached out to the FCC for their cooperation in getting to the bottom of exactly what happened with this enormous volume of false comments, and we received no substantive response. We reached out again in July, certain that the FCC would be just as troubled as we were about the corruption of its rulemaking process and the illegal use of so many real Americans' names. But again, we got nothing back. All told, we reached out 9 times to the FCC for records vital to our investigation, to no avail. Finally, on November 21st, I published an open letter to FCC Chairman Ajit Pai, calling on him to help us in our investigation. The FCC's response to my letter was to declare that our efforts to investigate all these fake comments was just, quote, a transparent attempt by a partisan supporter of the Obama administration's heavy-handed internet regulations to gain publicity for himself. Remarkably, the FCC expressed no concern over the corruption of its rulemaking process. The hyper-partisan attack on me was a wholly inappropriate evasion of the issues we had raised. At 8:20 a.m. this morning, knowing that we were holding this press conference, the FCC's Inspector General's office finally emailed my team offering their assistance in our investigation. This is a big step, but given the FCC's conduct over the past 8 months, we remain skeptical and will continue to call on the Commission for full cooperation, including an appropriate federal investigation into the corruption of the rulemaking proceedings. We hope the Inspector General will exert pressure on the FCC leadership to drop its spurious partisan attacks and support full investigations into this unprecedented abuse of Americans' rights to have input into rulemaking. This should not be a partisan issue. Public comment is an integral part of our government's decision-making process. It is vital that our officials, whether elected or appointed, listen to the regular Americans that will be affected by net neutrality or any of the other countless issues that require public comment. We're examining fake comments that were apparently submitted both in support of and opposition to the FCC's proposed rule. So this is not a dispute on the merits, and it should not be debatable that Americans have a right to control the use of their identities. It's unconscionable that the FCC chairman would be unwilling to assist in rooting out the misuse of so many Americans' identities and into the corruption of the process that will determine net neutrality's future. Today, I'm proud to stand here with FCC Commissioner Jessica Rosenworcel to once again ask Chairman Pai to provide records vital to our investigation, to support a comprehensive federal investigation, and to delay the vote on his proposed rule until we can determine what the public really wanted to tell the FCC. In order to understand who may have perpetrated this massive scheme, we need access to the FCC's logs and other digital data. We need cooperation from our federal counterparts, and we need the time to undertake a comprehensive investigation. In an era when foreign governments and those seeking an unfair advantage here at home have tried to undermine our democratic institutions, it is more important than ever that our government is open, honest, and transparent, and that we identify and hold responsible those working to corrupt our democracy. I'm asking Chairman Pai to join us in our effort to investigate millions of fake comments and massive identity theft perpetrated against Americans. Commissioner Rosenworcel, who is standing alongside me here today, has been leading this fight within the FCC itself. The Commissioner is the type of ally that is all too rare in Washington these days. She is someone who is clearly committed to the rule of law and the integrity of our government processes. She's also a passionate advocate for protecting consumers over special interests. And now I would like to introduce a true champion for Internet freedom and the rule of law, FCC Commissioner Jessica Rosenworcel.
Thank you to the Attorney General for having me here today. I believe speaking out in service of the common good is a good thing, and that's what we're talking about here today. I also believe that the United States internet economy is the envy of the world. We invented it. The applications economy began here on our shores, and the broadband below us and airwaves all around us deliver its collective might into our homes, businesses, and civic institutions here in New York and all across the country. And what produced that dynamic engine of entrepreneurship and experimentation is openness. That openness is revolutionary. It's also what net neutrality is all about. It means creating without permission, building community beyond geography, organizing without physical constraints, consuming content when you want it and where you want it, and cultivating markets for goods and ideas, both around the corner and around the world. I believe it's essential that we sustain this foundation of openness, and it's why I support net neutrality. But right now, at the FCC, my colleagues would like to eliminate net neutrality, and they are willing to provide our broadband providers with new powers. Powers to block websites, powers to throttle services, and powers to censor online content. Now, there's a lot to dislike in this proceeding on a substantive basis. But what I really want to be here and talk to you about today is the process, because the process has a fatal flaw. We are about to make sweeping changes to the way that every American experiences the internet. And right now at the FCC, we have more than 23 million comments in our record. That's unprecedented, that amount of participation. But we also have real problems with the comments that have been filed. As many as 1 million comments may involve the fraudulent use of names and stolen identities, including tens of thousands of individuals here in New York and so many others across the country. We also have nearly 500,000 comments that have been filed from Russian email addresses. And at the same time, we have 50,000 consumer complaints that are missing from our record but have been filed elsewhere at the FCC. In addition, we have an alleged distributed denial of service attack on this record that is under investigation by the Government Accountability Office. And when you add all that up, what you have is a record that is hard to trust. I've called for public hearings at the FCC on this subject, just like Republican and Democratic administrations have done in the past on net neutrality. That in light of this record, I think my colleagues and myself need to get out from behind our desks and computers and talk directly to the American public. I also think it is incumbent upon the FCC and all of my colleagues to stand back, figure out what's happening with this record before us, and get to the bottom of these stolen identities. And based on the Attorney General's investigation, we know that Americans in states all across the country, including California, Georgia, Missouri, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Texas, were also likely victims. So I encourage leaders in those states to join this effort and defend their citizens' identities. Now, in just 10 short days, the FCC will vote on repealing our net neutrality rules. But it is clear that our process for serving the public interest is broken. And I do not believe that the agency should move forward until a credible investigation is completed. So I call on my colleagues to halt this vote until we get to the bottom of what has happened with these stolen identities and the quality of our public record. The integrity of the public record is at stake, and the future of the internet depends on it. Thank you.
Thank you. And if you identify yourself to Amy, we can take some questions.
Alex Silverman from WCBS Radio. Can you talk a little about how you determine how a comment or set of comments is fake and I guess what's fake?
Well, beginning in the spring, there were reports, journalists, researchers, and others started to identify the problem of fake comments. This is not something that was that went unnoticed for very long. And then my team in the Bureau of Internet and Technology started looking at this, discovered lots of anecdotal evidence, instances where it was clear that there was a website in another country, Russia, for example, that generated a certain number of comments. There was a study by Broadband for America, which is actually an industry group that represents internet service providers, that determined that out of the 1.5 million comments that were clearly written by individuals, 98.5% of the comments favored net neutrality. And yet, of these now 23 million comments, it was a much more mixed bag. Now, understand, we're looking at comments that we think were fake comments or comments from people whose identities were stolen, either in favor or against net neutrality. But we worked with a lot of research that was coming in over the internet. Different researchers started conducting different studies, looking at word patterns and looking at IP addresses. The problem is we cannot get to the bottom of this without getting the information from the FCC we have been seeking since June. They have the logs that show where the comments came from, and when we're dealing with millions and millions of fake comments, and a very high portion. I mean, this is an unprecedented outpouring of commentary. The American people do care about this issue, but you can't have a valid rulemaking proceeding that requires, as a matter of law, notice and the opportunity to be heard for the American people if you're looking at records that don't tell you what the American people wanted, because you can't tell the difference between fake or stolen comments and real comments. So we picked up on this from different reports. We've been looking at it ourselves. We called people whose identities were stolen. Others have. Fight for the Future wrote to the FCC with a list of people whose identities had been stolen. So we've been making them aware of this along with others who work in this space. But as a law enforcement agency, looking out for the interests of New Yorkers, we have the right and the obligation to investigate the theft of New Yorkers' identities. And up until now, we've received no cooperation.
To follow up on your fleeting mention of Russia, is there any indication or any evidence at this point to suggest that the Russian government is involved here?
We have not been able to determine that. We know that there are reports that there were sites in Russia that were involved. But again, unless we get the information from the FCC, it's anecdotal evidence, or it's evidence based on analysis that not illegitimate. It is evidence, but it doesn't give us the ability to conclusively find anything, much less establish liability and determine where there's jurisdiction. So, as I said, there are three things that need to happen now. The FCC has to cooperate with state investigations. There has to be a federal investigation because there's some federal laws we can't prosecute as state law enforcement agencies. And then they just have to stop this vote. You cannot conduct a legitimate vote on a rulemaking proceeding if you have a record that is in shambles, as this one is.
Tony O'Sullivan, CNN. Have you found any indication of what groups or group might have been responsible for the fake comments?
We can't say that with any certitude because the actual evidence of where the emails came from is in the possession of the FCC. So that's one of the reasons they have to cooperate if law enforcement is to get to the bottom of this.
And in terms of the public consultation process, what steps would need to be taken for this not to happen again? I mean, there is no requirement to actually verify your identity when you submit a comment to the FCC. So are there any reforms that you could suggest that would help to stop this happening in the future?
Sure. I mean, this is something that Congress, I think, should address. I understand the rulemaking process is a critical part of our system of laws and regulations in the United States. The Administrative Procedure Act has been around for quite a few decades. There are many Supreme Court cases commenting on it, defining the parameters of notice and the opportunity to be heard. This is important to our American system of government as our rules on voting or our rules for how you get into court. This is a critical component. And it is not optional to provide the American people with the opportunity to comment on proposed rulemaking. So if you do it in a way that has been degraded and corrupted, but don't take any steps to sort that out before you vote on a rule, we think that is improper, but Congress certainly should take steps to ensure that there are appropriate penalties for submitting false comments or fake comments. And to the extent that this is not something that was anticipated because the technology's evolved, that's something that should be at the top of the to-do list. This is something that cannot be allowed to exist. Now, there were more comments for this proceeding than there have been in the past, but this also makes you question what's going on with the other comments on other rulemaking proceedings that are underway in Washington. So this is an issue that transcends the fight over net neutrality. But this is an extraordinary, glaring example of a problem that has to be fixed. Commissioner, do you want to say anything?
Sure. For more than 7 decades, the Administrative Procedures Act has made it possible for the public to participate in some of the biggest rulemaking decisions in this nation. Agencies open up their doors and, in effect, ask the American people to tell them what they think about proposed rules, how their lives might be changed by them. That's true of the Federal Communications Commission and many other agencies in Washington. It is essential that we come up with ways to manage the integrity of that process in the digital age. The evidence we have here in the net neutrality record is that we have failed to do so, and we've got to fix it before we proceed with a vote.
Just one follow-up question. How many, do you have a precise number on the number of people that your office has spoken to whose identities were used? I know that there's these numbers, but in terms of a number on the amount of people you've spoken to confirm that their identities were used?
Dozens, hundreds. I mean, we've it's an ongoing process. We've spoken to dozens of New Yorkers, and we've heard reports from others. So we just set up our web portal last week, and I would urge anyone who cares about this issue or cares about the integrity of the rulemaking process, go online, go to ag.ny.gov, and check your name out. Find out if a comment was submitted in your name. We think the number could be significantly higher than 1 million, but we're having to conduct this slow and not particularly efficient process because the FCC's refusal to cooperate. But so we have contacted people, others have contacted people and sent that information to the FCC. They know there were a lot of identities stolen. They're the ones who can get to the bottom of it. And again, this is 6 months of stonewalling before at 8 a.m. this morning they finally sent us a letter saying, we want to see if we can provide assistance. So we will continue to fight for that, but as the Commissioner has noted, there is no way on this record you can have a legitimate vote on this issue. I mean, you're required to take into account what the American people think. There's no way with this set of corrupted records that they have not denied that the records are corrupted. So we are hoping that they will delay the vote so that we can get to the bottom of this and you can have a vote based on what the American people really think.
Commissioner, what does it say to you about the chairman's view of the process, that he's responded in the way that he has?
Well, I can't tell you that I know what he thinks, but I do know this, that under Section 5 of the Communications Act, he has the power to deal with this differently. And I think it is incumbent upon him and all my colleagues to work with our state counterparts, particularly those in law enforcement, to make sure that the integrity of our record is secure.
Thank you very much. All right, thank you.